3, 2, 1, liftoff.
Hi there, it's G again. I know I've been away for a while, but I'm back now, and what I wanted to show you was this game I've been really focused on lately. It's called Captain of Industry, and as you can imagine, this may look something similar to Factorio. However, in this case, we have something that's a little bit more realistic. I found this really interesting, and today I want to show you a few interesting nuances, and I'll go into those further in subsequent videos. But for now, let me just show you just a couple of interesting things I figured out while I was playing this. First of all, you might have seen this before, is burial of pipes. I found this particularly interesting when you're first starting out and you're struggling with a situation where you're trying to get large vehicles to get fuel from this port and they just can't get underneath the pipes. They can't get through there. I found that burying them is a good solution, but then later I found there's a much better solution, in fact, if you want to do it quickly, because this is a pretty intensive process. A few other things I found out is that you can use multiple liquids in your pipes. I'm going to probably set up a separate video for this, but just to give you an idea, here we have something that's outputting naphtha and fuel gas, and naphtha actually goes into this pipe here. You can see there's also diesel in here, and this guy is producing diesel. It then goes into this pipe here, which then goes into this connector. An interesting property of these connectors is they can store multiple liquids, and you can use individual tanks which can only store one liquid to separate the two liquids into their individual ones. Only one liquid can flow in this pipe at a time, but they alternate, so if the pipe is large enough it can accommodate that without backing anything up. Anyways, you can apply the same idea to food sorting. And in this case, what we got going on here is we've got this massive belt coming in with all kinds of food from the farms, which I'll show you in a minute. But what's happening here is it's passing through these connectors, and again, these connectors have some interesting properties where they can store multiple things at the same time. You can use this, which is a kind of a sorter where you define what you want to be pulled off the line, and then the remainder will go forward here. And then everything that's pulled off goes off to the side. But I thought, there's got to be a more clever and also unpowered way to do it. And this is it. What you got going on here is instead of sorting two things that go into two containers, you have four or more things. And for that, you can't just simply connect everything to one connector. There's just not enough room. So you can maybe connect two things to one connector. But anyways, that's pretty tricky. So instead what we've got here is you have some things will be taken off the line from this connector and then go into this tank, such as these potatoes. But some potatoes will still continue on forward, and wheat will be taken off here, corn will be taken off here, and then whatever the overflow, in this case there's some corn flowing, some other things, maybe potatoes, they will loop around and then it will try to re-enter this connector. This balancer prioritizes that, and it always wants to recirculate everything back. But if it gets stuck, there's an overflow which go ahead and converts everything into feed for the animals. And it gets taken over here into this segment here where the farms are for the animals. Again, some of these things I want to delve a little deeper into separate videos, but I just want to show you just a little bit of an overview without going into too much detail. Here are all the farms. There's different kinds. There's greenhouses and others. This game is pretty realistic. For a game, especially when you consider oil refining and petrochemical processes, it's quite involved. There are some things I want to show you later as well related to how to structure your pipes so you can get things as compact as possible. You can see you can have pipes go on top of the buildings only in certain particular arrangements, and you can stack it up so you can have things really tightly. And again, some players prefer to do everything sprawled out. I don't like that but that's just me. There's a desalination plant here that takes excess steam and desals water, but again, maybe a story for another day. And then once you have a lot of power, excess power that is renewable, you can also produce a lot of hydrogen, which is done through electrolyzers here. I would say my only complaint with this game is that electrolyzers don't look realistic whatsoever. I mean, this is kind of cartoony, but that's okay. Real electrolyzers on industrial scale, they look something similar to this arrangement. They don't look nearly as glamorous and orange colored, but that's okay. Anywho, the power for these electrolyzers is provided by a whole bunch of solar panels over here, as you can see. And then a lot of the water for the town, where you actually need a lot of fresh water, is not provided, in fact, by desal, which provides only a little bit of water, but in fact it's provided by these rainwater collectors. As you can see, it's raining, and it's about to stop. There's some buffer tanks here, and so forth. So if you have a lot of land, like as I do here, you can put a lot of rain collectors. And then there's some underground water pumps over here, which supply additional water. And you can actually, let me see if I can show you. Here you go. You can see this is all water here, underground. And usually I find 2 pumps per this sort of underground water table is just the right amount. Any more than that, and you can probably deplete the water table, where it's going to then wait for it to refill. It's just going to become a pain in the butt. So I find 2 is good. Oh yeah, over here, there's, you might think this is a big open pit mine, but actually quite the opposite is going on. We're actually bringing in all of our copper externally by shipping overseas. And this is actually a dump for the excess copper. So I didn't know where else to put it, so I just dumped it here. Now, some people will say, oh, this is unsustainable, but frankly, the amount of dumping is so slow that you'll probably get bored much faster than this gets filled up, so not an issue. I ran out of places to dump it. As you can see here, there's actually a whole bunch of stuff been dumped underground. These bars indicate stuff that's underneath. So as a bar is sticking up, it's actually indicating something going down. So it's kind of an inverted chart. But anyways. Oh yeah, some of the things I want to show you is there is a way you can have multiple things in one belt, and then you can deliver to multiple places. And you know, if you play Factorio, you may think this is akin to a main bus, although in Factorio a lot of times the main bus is going to have a whole bunch of lanes and you're going to have individual products. Here I'd refer to this as a main bus, where you have multiple products on one line, and they are received from different places and they get dumped at different places. And there is only one problem with a bus like this, is if one thing gets backed up, it can back up the entire bus. So you need to have buffers and things like this, and sorters. But this buffer goes all the way around the base. It goes through here where there's some sulfur that's being loaded. This is a buffer for that. Sulfur actually comes on this line, and it comes from sulfur processing. I'm not going to get too much into it in this video. But anyways, here's an example of a sorter. Maybe I'll do something a little bit more in depth about this. But again, same idea. You can see we're using these connectors, and these connectors are good at filtering when there's only 2 products on the line. So you need to use a combination of this sorter and these filters, or containers rather, that can filter and buffer at the same time. And you do need buffering for a bus like this, because there's sometimes an overflow of one thing and not enough of the other. It's not 100% even amount of each thing at all times, so you do need a little bit of buffering. So I thought it would be a neat combination to do it this way, instead of just using all the regular U-shape, you know, these kind of sorters. Anyways, yeah. A couple other things. Oh, this I think deserves a little bit more explanation on its own, but I'll just go ahead and say that you can really abuse, you can get downright abusive with this idea of multiple things on the same bus. And you can have outputs of, let's say, this food processor with outputs sugar and biomass. You can just go ahead and dump it all in the same belt and use these to sort it out after the fact, as opposed to using individual belts on this thing to output. Because a lot of people usually will do, okay, one output belt for all the sugar, maybe one output belt for all the crap after the fact, and that's gonna, you know, clutter this. I figured this is a lot more elegant. So, yeah. Anyways, I gotta say, I found it quite amusing that this game allows for something that's really akin to a regolith melter in Oxygen Not Included. And you know how much I love those. So this machine here, this assemblage is part of that, except this part that's paused. Never mind that right now. That's another refinery. But this part over here, let me actually back up for a minute. Let me actually go over here. I'll show you what I'm talking about. Okay, so here, right here, it's currently empty. There's a ship that's going to be coming in momentarily. But what it does is it's going to take rock off the ship, just this useless rock, basically. We're going to bring it, and we're going to bring it all the way here, all around this belt, and then we're going to eventually stick that into a buffer over here. It's just buffers. And this used to come out of this mine. That's why I left these buffers here. But, you know, they don't really need to be here. Anyways, this rock gets then put onto this main bus. Here it is. You can see there's a certain amount of rock. In fact, there's another little trick that I want to show you. You can control this rock by using these dividers. And I would call them dividers because here's an amount. Here we have 200. And it gets split into two. But each of these is only 60. So at most you can have 120 on this line. But if you want to separate some more, you can click this here and unpause it. And now we're going to have it three-way. So you're going to have 60, 60, and 60. And then you can either return this back. And what this does is it splits it into this particular 60 into half. So you have 60 plus 60 plus 30 here. And then 30 gets taken away and put back. And what that gives you is 150. So you can really granularly adjust this, and you can use these belts and connectors as sort of to divide up larger belts into smaller ones, and then add them together. And you can do a little bit of simple subtraction and addition to get just the right amount, and then you put that on the main bus. And the reason to do this is so we have as little overflow as possible. So anyways, this rock then makes its way all the way back to this area over here. Let me show you. Right, so you start with this useless rock, and then it comes in, and it actually comes in over here. There it is, it's coming in. Here we have a kind of an overflow system. Here we have the feed overflow, and then we have some additional buffering here. And some of this rock goes into other things, some filter product and whatever. This is akin to, I guess, air filters in oxygen. But anyways, take this rock. We're going to crush it into gravel. We're then going to crush it into sand. And the way I arrange these is these go kind of all facing one direction with the input on this top side over here. And this guy here inputs on this bottom side. And so you feed the rock in here. Gravel comes out on the opposite side, feeds it into these three because it's a 3-to-1 ratio. And you have sand coming out at the end. Then you put the sand on the belt, and the sand, it's going around, and it's going over here, and then it's coming into these glass makers. So you're going to take the sand and you're going to combine it with limestone, salt, and other stuff, and you make glass mix. So a little bit more complicated, let's say, than oxygen, but in the end, what you're doing is you're taking rock and you're making glass. Here's glass coming out. And then you're using this glass to buy stuff with it. In this case, you can only buy one thing with glass, and that's coal. So I would say definitely as close to a regolith melter as one can get. You take worthless rock, which you can get. There's a limited rate at which it can come in, but the total amount that you can get is unlimited. And so you then buy coal with this rock. With this, you see glass here, but essentially you can think of it as you take rock and you buy coal with it. After all, it's all said and done. These pools here, they're used to generate salt, by the way. And then the sulfur here is used to generate sulfuric acid. That's why. Just a couple extra components to make glass, so it's not just sand. Anyways, once you have this coal, this is what I would call a coal economy. And that's because we're using this coal then to purchase a bunch of other things. You purchase gold ore, which then gets refined here through this machine. And we use this gold to buy. You can buy a couple of things with it. In this case, we're buying oil, crude oil with it. Here it is. Now, I built this whole refinery to refine that oil, but I decided, you know what, that's not actually necessary because I don't really need that much. So this oil gets shipped to the other refinery you saw previously. And then over here we're using coal to buy more limestone. And you need this limestone to produce glass mix. So really what you're having here is, it's kind of some of the coal that you use to buy this goes back into the system as limestone essentially. So some of it becomes like an input, and then whatever remains you can use and buy things with it. Anyways, once we've used all this coal for buying limestone and gold and oil and etc. And oh, by the way, gold is actually used in other places. So we use gold over here to buy crude oil, but then we also use it for other things. And you have it here, and trucks can just grab it from this warehouse and take it away. Anyways, I built this wall over here, by the way, which helps to, prevent the soil from collapsing inward. So you take this coal. Now we've bought our coal. We've used it up for everything we wanted on this little kind of peninsula, if you will. And it gets put onto this main bus, and it gets taken all the way back to here. Here we have a sorter, and we're gonna have, not this one, here it is. So this guy will take some excess rock, which didn't get used, and take it away. And then coal gets put into here, buffered, filtered, and gets put into this main coal storage here, you can see. And then a lot of it goes into these blast furnaces. Now, some people are would rather convert everything to electric furnaces, like this one here, for example. I decided that, if you have a coal economy and you have all this coal that you just don't know what to do with, you might as well just use the plain old blast furnaces. This is a blast furnace 2. There's a version 1, which is really half the efficiency. This is better, but you don't need to go necessarily with electric arc furnaces for everything. It depends. If you're doing a kind of a coal economy, up to a point you can do everything with coal. You can do it mostly with blast furnaces. Some things use electric furnaces, such as these glass makers. Again, we're making glass here, but this is to recycle. This is a recycling plant. This is the recycling sorting plant, and then we take the recycled material and then we make glass with it, and then we recycle it into copper and steel and so forth. But anyways, yeah, so the coal comes in and it's used mostly for this, but some of it is used elsewhere. So this elsewhere gets put onto this other bus here, and it gets taken all the way down to here, right here. And you have these coal boilers. So yeah, we have a nice combination of solar and coal. And I used to have I tried a few different things. I tried oil boilers and other things, and I found that up to a point, if your population is like below 4,000, generally that's like the sweet spot. You can do everything on a coal economy, and you power everything by this worthless rock, essentially. Yeah. So that's basically it for the coal. This is a slag recycler, because you have these blast furnaces. There's going to be a lot of slag coming off of it. It comes in on the same bus as coal, but what happens is coal will get taken away, excess will get dumped onto here, and then if there is any excess, trucks will take off this overflow. But this guy here takes this slag and it trades it for sour water. And sour water is, well, at first in the beginning of the game it's a waste, but as you progress it actually becomes useful raw material. And ideally you don't want to ever dump it into the ocean. Just save it into tanks if you can, and then once you progress further enough in the game, then go ahead and start using it as material. Because if you just throw it out, which you can, first of all you're causing a lot of pollution, and second of all you're throwing away useful material, which you can extract water and sulfur and ammonia from that. It's pretty good. So these plants actually do that. These right here, they extract sulfur, ammonia, water. All these are useful materials, especially ammonia, I would say, which is used for fertilizer. Yeah, so one of the other things I want to show you, this is a steam power plant. There's a couple of them here on this map, but this one in particular is actually powered in a kind of an interesting way. Here we have waste steam that's being produced. Actually, I'll show you over here. You have these exhaust scrubbers and you're producing waste steam. It's a low pressure steam. It gets put into this, again, you have these underground pipes that I've set up here. It gets put into this pipe. And yeah, the underground pipes, I gotta tell you, they're quite nice. It comes out over here on the surface and goes into this area over here. And you have this feed here. And here's something interesting. It's going into, I don't want to get too much into details here on how this works, but we have this buffer pipe, and you need that. That's the point. When you have steam coming out of scrubbers and things like that, and it's not coming from a boiler, you need to have buffer. And a buffer in this case is made of in form of a pipe. Now, if you play Factorio, you know you can just put steam into big tanks. You can't do that in this game, probably because that's not very realistic. Steam will condense other things, but here you have a very you have a pipe. And you can imagine this as a very insulated pipe, because there are no insulated pipes in this game, but I think you can just use your imagination and say, okay, this pipe must be insulated if it's carrying steam, otherwise none of this would work. And so what this pipe does is it acts as a buffer, and so sometimes you have too much steam, sometimes you have not enough steam coming from scrubbers, but this turbine can't tolerate that. It needs a nice constant stream of steam. This is a low pressure turbine, and this is a larger low pressure turbine. And it uses a low pressure steam to produce mechanical power, which puts a torque on the shaft, which then runs everything else, including generators. These are mechanical torque buffers, also known as a flywheel. So it's going to store a lot of rotating energy, and it's going to then put the torque on the shaft when you need it, and you essentially take it when you don't need it, when you have an excess. So yeah. Any excess low pressure steam, if there's too much, gets dumped onto this overflow pipe, essentially. This guy over here is a high pressure turbine which produces mechanical power, but it also produces a low pressure steam as a result. It is preferred for this turbine, yes. And for this turbine, it is only powered by scrubbers. Yeah, so anyway, this excess steam, it gets put into, it's a little tricky to see here because there's so many pipes. It gets put into this larger pipe, just because you have a smaller pipe merging into a larger pipe. Usually you could put a connector here to make it look nice, but it's not necessary. Anyway, so this low pressure steam is used to go and feed the desal plants over here. These use low pressure steam. These use depleted steam, which is basically useless except for desalination. And you can also use it to, condense it back to water. These towers only run when there's an excess of this depleted steam. And when there is, they're going to just convert it to water at a 75% ratio. And if you have some low pressure steam as an excess, which rarely happens because usually these guys can handle it, but if they can't, then it gets dumped out here and recycled into water. There's a whole recycling water process that's going on here, but I just wanted to show you just some of the general ideas and concepts that I've kind of been toying around with in this game. There is another one that I want to show you that has to do with burial of pipes. Here's an example of a large steam buffer. Again, as I mentioned, you can't put it in the tanks, but you can put it into a whole lot of pipes, and you can stack these pipes 4 layers deep, and you can kind of zigzag them around, and you end up with this. And so this stores like over 1,000 units worth of steam, which is quite a bit. One of these tanks can store about 360. This is kind of a medium-sized tank. And so that's quite a bit of steam. And so if there's a problem with coal feed or something like that, there's not enough steam being produced, you're not completely screwed here. You're going to be able to feed your turbines. The only thing is, unlike a tank, you can't put an alert on this. So if it's running low, you can't really tell. But, oh well, that's what we have. But what I wanted to do was bury this, and I'll show that to you in another video, how to do that. So that way it's not sitting on the surface. I did this here just so you can see exactly in intricate detail how it's done. You have basically 4 layers of zigzag, and this pipe here is a medium pipe. You can use a largest pipe as well. It will store a little bit more, but it depends on what materials you have. If you have only basic materials, you can use the most basic pipe initially, and it won't store as much, but you know, if that's what you have, then just use that. Yeah, so that's neat for situations where you have a turbine that starts and stops, or you may have a problem with fuel coming in to produce steam, things like that. It's good to have steam buffer. In fact, it's good to have buffers for just about anything. But you know, as you progress in the game, you kind of see where you can cut out certain buffers, and you start removing them and packing things in. Here you have quite a few buffers, but these are used mostly as filtering. This is a food processor, and again, this is I tried to pack it in as much as I could. It processes just about everything. It makes flour in oil and cooking oil, and corn mash is used for ethanol production. The rest of this makes corn mash. Yeah. And then here we have, oh yeah, here's something interesting I want to show you. I'm going to let you in on a little secret. I'm going to show you how the sausage is made. So most people don't want to see that, but I'll show you anyway. First of all, here we have chickens coming in, and in this game you only have chickens. You don't have any other kind of animals. I suspect that it has to do with certain systems of belief and things like that, probably. So this chicken is a good one-size-fits-all, I think. You know, unless you're vegan. In this case, well, it is what it is, you know. But anyway, so we get chicken carcasses coming out of the farms. There is no abattoir here or anything like that. It all gets done right in the farm. Comes out in this meat processor here, and you can rename this. I mean, it's a food processor. Just renamed it to meat processor. You get meat, and after that, you go into the splitter over here on the conveyor belt. Priority of it goes into this warehouse, which gets taken directly to the settlement. Any excess gets put onto this conveyor belt and gets put into this meat buffer, meat locker, I guess. And then after that, it comes out over here and gets fed into this line, and it has a priority. On the other line, you have flour, so you have 2 different products coming into one balancer. But the priority goes onto the product, which is meat. And currently there's no meat, so only flour keeps coming into this guy. But if meat does come in, this has a buffer in itself, so it will retain some flour. And then once meat comes in, it's going to then say, oh, there's no meat trimmings or anything else, or maybe there won't be enough flour. Anyway, it will go to the next job, and it will start hacking this meat into trimmings. And then you create more trimmings, and what it will do, trimmings will come out of here and then feed back into itself. And you have to do these feedback loops because in this game, you can't just take meat trimmings from one job and immediately put them into another job. I think that would be nice, personally. I would have done it that way, but that's not the way it's programmed. It's going to output them onto this line regardless. You can't just recycle them internally. And then it gets recycled in after it comes off this line, gets put onto here. Sorry, it gets put over here, comes back in, and then the sausage is made, and you just add salt and flour, and there you go. Of course, you know, this is generalized. Obviously, in real sausages, more ingredients and things like this, like toilet paper, you know, soy, things like that. Just kidding. There's no toilet paper. But, yeah. Anyways, over here, I want to show you that cake is, in fact, not a lie. You have flour, sugar, and cooking oil, and you take eggs. So 4 ingredients, 5 actually, and fruit. You take these 5 ingredients and you make cake. So this is probably the most sophisticated food processor setup, or recipe, I should say. Maybe the setup is not very sophisticated, but the recipe is. And you make cake, and then it essentially eats up any excess, because otherwise you'd have excess eggs or fruit and things like this, and this eats up all the excess of these things. And then cake gets delivered by a truck over here into this. So these are all farmers markets or food markets, etc. You can rename them. I just renamed them to whatever. And here we have Snack Factory. I just attached it directly as close to the town as possible. One other thing is we've got waste production happening. So this is all the waste that is being collected from the town. This is the town, by the way. It comes in these segments. And this is the waste that cannot be recycled. It just gets burned. And then of what can be recycled is biomass, which comes from food. So when people eat food, they're going to have usually things that you're not going to eat, and they get dumped in here as biomass. And, you know, this is your green bins. Now, I know for some reason they're showing them as brown, but they're really green bins. And the ones that are supposed to be blue bins, I mean, at least here in Ontario, where I live, they're blue, and then these would be green, but, you know, they're brown and green instead. These are electronic recyclables, another metal. And these you get glass, copper, iron, things like that coming out of here. One thing that does not get recycled is quartz, and that's because, well, it doesn't really get recycled in real life very much. It's not worth it because you make it out of, you know, sand, basically. In this game, you don't make it out of plain old sand. You have to get quartz, but that's beside the point. Anyway, things that we normally think of being recycled are here. One thing that is missing out of this game is things like aluminum. They've simplified it to iron and copper, kind of like Factorio, but I mean, in real life, things are a bit more complicated. And then if these things get backed up for whatever reason, you know, they get filled up, it just goes straight into into garbage, into this waste. And that goes, in this case, into incinerator. You don't have to use incinerators. You could just take this waste and just bury it somewhere. You can make islands out of it. I just burn it. That's all there is to it. So, yeah. This segment over here is essentially a factory. And this segment over here is essentially smelting. So you have kind of like, I can just kind of cut off, I'll show you. So smelting, so you get smelting here, you get factory here, waste recycling, this is market, food production, power and chemicals, and you have desal, and then you have hydrogen and shipping. And over here we have this one whole industrial island, essentially, with just a couple inputs and outputs into it. And basically takes rock and converts into glass. I just call it my regolith melter equivalent. And then you essentially get coal, which you use to buy everything else. So, oh yeah, over here is a little thing. It's just a little data center, which, again, you normally are not going to have a data center that's not enclosed. This is kind of silly, but I think it's just meant to look nice. I'm 100% certain that developers understand that you're not going to have a data center that's open to the world like this. But it's nice to look at. It's nice to look at. Here we have these heat exchangers, which are used to cool water. And you can kind of get the idea of water flow. Usually in these ones you have water trickling from top down, and then you have airflow going sideways. And that's how you chill water. In fact, a lot of these are actually used in real industrial processes, in petrochemical and other places. But things being simplified, they're not used in this process here. Maybe, I don't know, I'm hoping maybe in future updates something interesting like that will come up where they make it a little bit more sophisticated, but it might be tricky for some players. Anyways, here we have ethanol production and biodiesel. And you take some of the ethanol and cooking oil and you make diesel. Yeah, that's why I wanted to mention we don't use a lot of crude oil, and the reason for that is we have biodiesel coming from here. We also have these digesters, and I've actually been in one. It's quite smelly, but it's pretty neat. The temperature, it's very important to maintain the temperature at a very precise level, otherwise the bacteria, the anaerobic bacteria, are going to die, and so your whole thing is not going to work. So the temperature is very important, and the composition of soil and the waste that you're putting in there. And what you get, in fact, out of it is you get methane, and you get other things as well. That's why they've kind of generalized it here as fuel gas, whereas things are a little bit more complicated in real life. But you take this gas here, and then you have compost on the other end. But you take this gas, and then you're going to feed it into the rest of your network. In this case, let me see where the pipe for this gas is. All right, here it is. I think it's this pipe, yeah. So you feed it into the rest of your network. And then what we're doing here is we're using a method that's known in the industry as partial combustion of natural gas, and you're producing diesel out of it. There's actually a very large plant that Shell has constructed. I forgot where it is exactly, but there is wherever there is places of very cheap natural gas, and if the price on oil is high, this method actually, which is, again, it's kind of simplified here, but this method is used, in fact, in real life to produce diesel. And then you just sell diesel for your, and use it as fuel for your vehicles. You do need these air separators to produce oxygen, so you'll see the real plant has a lot of separators. And they actually look like this. Maybe slightly simplified here, but they look very much like this, in fact. So one of the things that also happens in air separators is you get other gases, trace gases, which are sold separately. But here we just have oxygen and nitrogen, just for the sake of simplicity. Yeah, a couple other things we have here in the oil refinery. First of all, you have your main 3 stages of distillation. You've got your you're going to separate. Now, again, is a little bit simplified, but you're going to get you're using steam reforming here, and you're producing heavy oil and sour water and medium oil. And sour water, again, is initially in the game as a waste, but later on it can be recycled and it's a raw material, and you extract sulfur out of it. And water generally gets recycled back into the plant because this plant needs steam, and so you're going to keep reusing that. The medium oil gets then turned into mostly diesel and some light oil, and then you get naphtha and fuel gas from light oil. And naphtha is used for various industrial applications, but one of them is you can reform it into diesel by adding hydrogen. And again, mostly like in real life, you're going to get hydrogen using not electrolyzers, but in fact steam reformers, which are not shown here, but I'll show you. They've got steam reformers. I have it over here, which is paused right now. You take natural gas or fuel gas, you use steam, and you're producing hydrogen, and carbon dioxide is a waste. That's normally the process, but if you have a lot of solar, which is essentially free electricity, you can put that into these electrolyzers, which in themselves produce very little hydrogen compared to a steam reformer. But if you have a lot of solar, you've got a lot of electrolyzers, then you're in business. And so we pipe this hydrogen into this refinery, and so we don't need to use as much natural gas, and therefore we don't need as much crude oil, because in this case natural gas does not come from anything like fracking or natural sources. I wish they added that, but they don't have that here. But instead you make it out of the refining process, as well as some biological processes like these digesters and things like that. And so you use that. So in this case I'm using it to produce diesel as gas. I'm not using it to produce hydrogen. But there's very many combinations that are possible. You can do very many different setups and flavors of this. Lots of options here. One other thing is, I showed you how you can use one pipe for 2 things or multiple things. Here we have essentially a pipe which takes in both naphtha and heavy oil. And again, not realistic. I'm kind of cheesing it a little bit, but I thought, what? If it's doable, I'm going to exploit it. And so you can receive both naphtha and heavy oil on the same pipe. Yeah. But yeah, I would say, real distillation towers, you're going to have much taller, and it's going to distill at multiple levels. And then you're going to have reboilers and vacuum distillers and other things. So it's quite simplified, but I would say it's quite realistic at the same time, which is what intrigued me in the first place and why I'm talking about it still and going on and on about it, just because I find it pretty exciting. Some of the products coming off that plant, like naphtha or ethanol from the bio, from corn, you can use to produce plastic, which is, why ethanol? Polyethylene, right? So you get you make ethylene, then you use chlorine to make ethylene, then you make polyethylene when you polymerize it, which is why it's called a polymerization plant. Or you can use naphtha for this. And then you get waste exhaust, which again is kind of generalized as quote-unquote exhaust, but it's not that simple. But anyway, you take this exhaust and you take it to scrubbers, and ideally you do not want to release any exhaust to the atmosphere. That's nasty. You want to put everything through scrubbers, and you extract sulfur and steam. They will produce some pollution, so I want to show you here. It shows air pollution. that's essentially what's coming out of this pipe. It's sort of like, it's not CO2, it's nothing, it's just air pollution. It's whatever couldn't be scrubbed. But everything that could be scrubbed gets put into either pipes or conveyor. So sulfur gets put on the conveyor as a solid. I will tell you something though. In real life, sulfur is usually piped because its melting point is, if I remember from oxygen, I think it's something similar. It's something like 168, 170 degrees. Correct me if I'm wrong. And it's usually just piped around. And it's because it's much easier to handle as a liquid. And then only when you're going to store it in very large quantities, you're going to just pile it somewhere in big solid chunks. Ironically, actually, in this game, you cannot just dump sulfur into a big pile like what we're doing here with copper and a little bit of coal. You can see the black coal there. You can only put it into these containers. That's limestone. You can only put it into these containers. Like here's an example. Yeah, here's sulfur. You can see what you can put in these containers. There's several things, but you cannot just dump it out, which doesn't make a lot of sense. Oh, there's a truck that's stuck here. Let me recover it. There's something cool that you can do in this game, which is to teleport vehicles, and you can use that recover button. And so if you're in a situation where you need to get a vehicle somewhere, I'll show you something you can do. And this video is starting to get a little long, but okay, let me just show you anyway. Here, you're going to get the vehicle depot, and it has to be whichever one is compatible with the vehicles you want to teleport. So this is for the largest possible vehicles and anything below that. But I'm going to use this vehicle depot 2 as an example, because this supports like medium-sized and small vehicles. And let's say I want to teleport excavators in here. Because maybe it's an island or everything is blocked off, I can basically use quick delivery to teleport all the materials and just insta-build this. And then I can then use a recover method first by pausing the other depot, and then use the recover method to teleport vehicles, such as the ones that are here, to this depot. And then they will just pop up here. And you do that all using this Unity thing. It's a little bit cheesy, but, the game lets you do it, so I do it. So, oh yeah, at the beginning of the intro, you saw this. It's on a little bit of an island. I wanted to try and keep and preserve the natural environment as much as possible. So I made this pipe. This pipe over here is basically water that gets pumped. So there's underground water that's here, and I'm using those pumps. You need some water over here for the deluge, for the water deluge system for when this is launching. It uses hydrogen as the fuel. Again, a little bit departure from reality here, because we don't have any liquefaction facilities here or liquid oxygen or anything. You need liquid hydrogen and oxygen really, but I think this is in an early stage. That's something that will be added. So we'll see. We're gonna stay tuned for the devs to work on that. But yeah, so that water and a whole bunch of other water that's coming from the rainwater up here. You can see here it's merging, but there's more pumps, and then it's merging into these giant pipes over here, 2 of them, because one is not enough. And it's coming from the hills, and then it's flowing into the essentially to the rest of the town. This is the main water storage, rainwater tanks. There's a wastewater plant that's recycling, and some of the water comes back into the town. Again, actually, this produces some compost and fuel gas, which again gets piped into the refinery that I showed you earlier. But yeah. And then the rest of the water gets flows into the industrial process over here once it feeds the town. So it sort of prioritizes. So first water needs to feed the town, and then the rest of it goes into the industrial process. Let me tell you, if people can't flush their toilets in this town, they're going to lose their shit. They're going to freak. So we don't want that. Always make sure that there's fresh water available and we can remove the waste. I've removed the overflow system, but ideally, if there's an issue with your wastewater treatment, you want to have some overflow spouts dumping it directly, raw sewage directly into the ocean. I'm not a huge fan of that, but again, it's better than your town overflowing. So But at this point, I'm confident that this system is just going to work, so I don't need to worry about it. Oh yeah, I want to show you something here. As if I didn't show you enough already in this video. But this thing over here, you can see this plant. It requires brine for toxic slurry, which is an entirely different process. It's currently not running, but it's an entirely different process than wastewater treatment, which requires chlorine. So you need basically filter media for both, maybe in different amounts, but same material really. But you need two different materials additionally, which are piped fluids. However, as you can see here, there's only one input for either of those materials, so they have to share that if you want to use both. And then there's outputs, two outputs for water. So the sharing, how do you do that? Okay, once again our friend connector comes in, which carries two things, but now you have this interesting situation where you have two separators and you have two input pipes. So here's an input pipe for chlorine, and down here somewhere is an input pipe for brine. This is a brine tank, this is a chlorine tank, this is an overflow pipe. And what's happening is you look at this connector, you see these two liquids and are constantly trading places. You see how that's going on? Yeah, so there's always going to be both of them available at any time for this plant to grab it. So the plant will grab it out of this connector, which is right up against the plant. There's no room, there's no extra segment of pipe here. It's right up against the plant, and you have brine coming in first, and then any excess brine gets dumped onto this pipe. Then you have chlorine coming in second, and then excess chlorine gets dumped onto this pipe. And then they get separated by their respective separators. I think this would be possible actually in real life even, because if you think about it, brine has a lot of chloride in it, because, you know, sodium chloride. This is a chlorine, so you can't really chlorinate this anymore. Although you can obviously, chlorine will dissolve in the water, so there'll probably be some chlorine in here no matter what, but this chlorine is a gas, so it bubbles out and gets separated into here. So I was just trying to justify the idea for this even existing. You can do it in the game through some, through what I like to exploit some of these interesting methods, but I was trying to justify this to myself somehow. So, anyways, it's important to have these balancers here, so the priority is always going to be from the tank. So whatever overflow goes into the tank, always grab that first before using this top-up pipe. And same thing here. Chlorine coming out of this overflow tank, always grab it from there first before grabbing it from the top-up pipe. If you don't do that, you're going to block up the entire system. It's going to get stuck. So this works, and it works 100%. And you can use one plant, and you can boost it so it works at double the capacity, which is currently what it is. And also, it's nice because boosting it does not require an increase in electricity or workers, which is important. You really, if you're going to use boosting on anything, you really should use it on things that require most workers, such as water treatment plants and maintenance facilities, which I'll show you in a second. But yeah, this is where the filter media is made, and again, there's kind of a little loop trick where it's going to use both gravel and rock. First, it uses gravel to turn into rock, but when there's too much gravel and this gravel starts coming into this thing as an input, you can see here is a little bit of gravel there amongst a whole bunch of rock. If it sees gravel, it's going to process that. If it sees rock, it's going to process it into more gravel. And then this requires both gravel and sand. So I was able to combine this, and you can do this if you have this at a low volume. You can do that. So you use this to separate gravel and cycle it back in. And then this guy over here only outputs sand on this line. And then it feeds sand into here, but then any excess goes into this little buffer, which is in the form of a conveyor loop. And as soon as this starts to get really full, it's going to dump it out here. So this thing will eventually produce a little bit too much sand, and then just a little bit too much. And then it gets put onto this line. And it gets taken away. So, again, maybe it's slightly overcomplicated, but I've challenged myself to reduce the number of workers. And even though this uses only 2, I was like, you know what? If we can save a couple workers here and there, it adds up pretty quick. Maybe we can use it for a couple of trucks or something else. So I did it this way. Yeah, here we have hydrofluoric acid or hydrogen fluoride being produced. It's really usually in a liquid form, hydrofluoric acid. And this is used for usually dissolving things. In this case, we're dissolving yellow cake, but it's not currently running to produce uranium. But again, that's not being done right now. But you take that and you need that hydrofluoric acid to produce anesthetics, which is done at this plant, which uses an even more egregious way of sharing the lines with multiple materials. Again, you have a conveyor here, and we have a connector, but you see there's a pipe in the way, and we need every single pipe here. So I can't do like 2 ins, 1 out, like I did with the water plant. So you have to do something even more creative. So you have this alternation that can happen. You see, oh, there's a little steel coming in now. And then this is the overflow. So it'll sand either steel or glass on this line, or both, sometimes depending on what's going on. And there's a trick to this. I thought about this long and hard, really trying to figure out how to do this, and man, it was a challenge. You see, you have all these different ingredients. You have 3 liquids, which require 3 individual pipes. We could probably do something as I did with the water plant, where I could do like maybe 1 input pipe, 2 outputs, but then it was going to block this. I don't think there's any point in doing that. It's going to cause some issues. You could try. You can challenge yourself and see if you can do that, and if you can save the number of input liquid pipes. But in my case, I used them all individually. But then you've got 2 solids, and you've got these poppies over here. Now the poppies come in on a separate line. That's not a problem. But the 2 solids, that's a challenge. And you can't do that 3rd line. So again, what do you do, right? So what I had to do is I had to figure out when to feed and when not to feed one of the 2 ingredients. And when you do feed that optional ingredient, that second ingredient, it needs to be prioritized. So here is an example. We've got a flat balancer with a priority in. Okay. And the one that's not priority, you can see it just over here, that's glass. Glass is not prioritized. But this other one is. So what is this other one? Well, this other one is steel. You can see here's steel. And it's going into this balancer here. And the steel is not prioritized in this case on the input side. But what is prioritized? Anesthetics. And what is anesthetics? Anesthetics is the output of the process for which the input is steel. This is very important. So the output of the process for which we want to control the input is regulating the input. You see what I'm saying here? The output will control the input. This is so tricky, even I confused myself a little bit. Let me just try to recall how I did this, because this was a while ago. Alright, first of all, we've got this buffer here for anesthetics. And on the output here, let me just start with the output. Maybe then I'll recall what it is. So first of all, we're going to start with the output, which makes anesthetics and morphine. So here we go. Currently it's producing anesthetics. Here we're using connectors which essentially split into morphine up there, anesthetics down here. Morphine just simply comes out, gets buffered, and comes out into this robotic assembly which makes medical supplies. It uses both morphine and anesthetics, as well as some basic medical supplies. Okay, but so that's morphine, very simple. But anesthetics doesn't go there directly. It loops through this buffer here. It goes into this balancer, which it has priority. And what happens here is, I remember now, it's going to use up all of the steel. So you see steel is going to run out. So it's going to block up this line, which allows steel to enter the plant. Steel inputs here. So you can see here, it has priority on the anesthetics. Anesthetics then comes into this splitter, and it gets fed over here, but it's blocking up this line. It's blocking up this segment right here. And when it blocks it, it doesn't allow steel to enter, which is not preferred. So priority is not set for steel. It blocks the steel, but steel is required to make anesthetics in the first place. So once it blocks the steel, this plant is going to use up whatever steel it has to make all the anesthetics. Then all the anesthetics are going to slowly process through this conveyor here. And once this conveyor is empty and this thing runs out of anesthetics, it empties this conveyor. Once this conveyor is empty, it's going to then begin feeding steel, because the priority item will be gone. It'll be empty, and then the non-priority item will start feeding. After that, it's going to feed steel back into this plant here. This will start accumulating steel. We'll start making anesthetics. Anesthetics will start flowing back on this line, and then block this up, and it'll stop making them, and it'll be like a start and stop. Here it comes. You can see anesthetics just ran out. Now it's feeding steel. It'll take a second. Okay, here it comes. Here comes steel. It's going to start feeding this. Oh, there it is. And it will do this for some time until the point where anesthetics come in onto this line. Here they come. Here they come. And in a second, it's going to block up. There it is, stopped. So it stops the feed. Yeah, so this whole regulation of the output by the input itself, you can do it if they're both, can fit on the same conveyor belt. Like, for instance, if this was a liquid, this wouldn't be possible. But because they're both solid units which fit onto a regular flat conveyor belt, you can do this. And I think you'd probably be able to do this for some other things, but you can definitely do it for this. Now, that took me a while to figure out how to do that. But it works, and it's boosted to increase production, because if it's not, it's just not going to meet the needs. And in the end, what we're making is we're making these medical supplies 3, which we're using for the town. But also, we are using these medical supplies 3 to purchase copper, because we have so many. If we don't boost it, we don't have enough for the town. If we boost it, we have too much for the town. So we take and sell the excess of medical supplies, and we buy copper ore, which we then ship right over here. And then the excess of that, which is just a little bit, you can see here, it's going onto this belt here. It gets dumped into this giant pit. Although it's not as big as it used to be. It used to be a lot bigger, but I kind of covered it up. But yeah, that's the general idea of this. And then for the town, all the medical supplies and things get brought into this clinic over here. We have a deadly flu, but it's not a problem because we've got the best medical supplies money can buy here. So it's not really an issue. If you didn't have that, you'd be in trouble. Your population would be dropping like flies. But with these medical supplies 3, it's not an issue at all. A couple other things here. We've got an idea store. You know how much we all love those idea stores. It's good to have. They sell rocking chairs, among other things, which is good to have. Surprisingly, rocking chairs are made of glass and wood, as I'll show you over here, and steel. You look at this rocking chair, you're like, where's steel and glass here? But, you know, it's a game, all right? Anyways, a couple other things is we've got computers, which we're not producing. I just added the store here, but sorry, no iPhones. Maybe next time. This town, yeah, we just don't have, I just didn't bother with this. Maybe later. And then we've got appliances. Everyone needs a washing machine. That's so important. It saves so much time, let me tell you. So, and we make those up here. No, apologize. Up here. Yep. Using the most advanced robotic assembly, which is pretty neat. Oh yeah, so I was going to talk a little bit about boosting maintenance depots. Yeah, this uses 20 workers, and so if you boost it, you save 20 workers because the town needs 2 of these otherwise. And the more advanced ones use even more workers, so it's even more worthwhile boosting them. And this one, you only need to boost it if your town is really large, and at this point, it's not that big, so just one non-boosted maintenance depot 3 is enough. But yeah, there are certain things that cannot be boosted in this game, such as recycling plants or enrichment plant. And usually things that cannot be boosted depend a lot on machinery and not humans. So it's like when it comes to boosting, it's sort of like what is getting boosted here is like people working double shifts. That's sort of the concept. It's the workers. So if you have something that is dependent on machines only, like this robotic assembly, you can't boost it. Or in case of enrichment, you have machines that. Let's put it this way: if you spin the centrifuges too fast by trying to boost them, you're going to break them. So there's a reason why you can't boost those for uranium enrichment there. But anyway, waste sorting plants, I guess this sort of depends on machines as well. That's sort of the idea, mostly. Although, I will say that usually there's a lot of people that have to work here, which they do, and still it can't be boosted, but I guess it would be too cheesy if you could. But anyways. So yeah. Just kind of want to show you the overall island here. Just on a side note here, this whole segment, it didn't exist before, and neither did this on the side of the mountains. That was all added artificially by mining a lot of that rock. That's why that pit is so deep, as well as soil. And this was all made out of slag, which you can use to grow the island as well. So, yeah. You can obviously, there's plenty of space. I didn't have to do that, but because you have ports, they have to be in a certain arrangement. They have to be, you can see here, this is a required arrangement. You need that space available for the ship. And so I thought this would be kind of a cool idea to build it on the side there. I left a lot of this untouched. I just thought it was kind of neat. There's so much iron ore here that it's ridiculous. The colors are realistic. I mean, it's kind of red, and then for the copper, you see this kind of oxides of copper. They're green, kind of like those copper roofs you've seen that are oxidized. Yeah, so it all makes sense. But yeah. Let me know if you want me to make any more videos on this. I'll be waiting for your feedback in the comments below. As for now, I wish you a good day. This was Greasy Hammer, and thank you for watching. Bye-bye.